Some cars break records, some change the industry, and then there are these. Vehicles so absurd, so mind-blowingly dumb that even Elon Musk would do a double take. From engineering disasters to designs straight out of a fever dream, these 12 cars will leave you speechless. Get ready for the most ridiculous ride of your life. The 1958 Edsel Pacer was one of the many unfortunate victims of Ford's ill-fated Edsel brand, a name that has since become synonymous with automotive failure. Launched with high expectations, the Pacer was meant to be a mid-tier offering that would slot between mainstream Fords and more premium Mercurys. However, from the moment it was introduced, it was clear that something had gone very wrong. The car was plagued with strange styling, confusing marketing, and an overall identity crisis that left buyers scratching their heads rather than opening their wallets. One of the most controversial aspects of the Edsel Pacer was its styling. Ford's designers wanted Edsel to stand out from the competition, but instead of crafting a timeless and elegant look, they ended up with a design that many found off-putting. The most infamous feature was the horse collar grille, an unusual vertical oval that sat awkwardly at the front of the car. While it was meant to give the Edsel a distinct and recognizable appearance, it instead made the Pacer look like it was constantly surprised or gasping for air. The grille quickly became a joke among car buyers, and many found it downright unattractive. Beyond the controversial front end, the Pacer's design suffered from a mishmash of styling cues that felt neither modern nor cohesive. The car borrowed elements from both Ford and Mercury, yet the result was a vehicle that lacked its own distinct identity. The chrome trim was excessive even by late 1950s standards, and the two-tone paint options did little to help the car's awkward proportions. While some American cars of the era, like the Chevrolet Bel Air or the Chrysler 300, managed to balance extravagance with elegance, the Edsel Pacer simply looked strange and out of place. The issues with the Pacer didn't end with its appearance. The car was also hindered by a confusing and gimmicky array of features that failed to impress buyers. One of the most notorious was the Teletouch push-button transmission, which placed the gear selector buttons in the center of the steering wheel. The idea was to offer something futuristic and innovative, but in practice, it was a disaster. The system was unreliable, and since it was positioned where a driver's horn button would normally be, many people accidentally changed gears when they meant to honk the horn. Given the already lackluster reputation for reliability that the Edsel brand was quickly earning, this feature only made matters worse. Mechanically, the Pacer wasn't a terrible car, but it wasn't anything special either. It came equipped with a 303 horsepower, 361 cubic inch V8, which gave it decent performance for the time, but there was nothing groundbreaking about it. Other cars in its class offered similar power without the baggage of Edsel's reputation. In terms of ride quality and handling, it was a typical late 1950s American sedan, comfortable but floaty and uninspiring. It didn't offer any real advantages over a standard Ford or Mercury, making it hard to justify its existence. The biggest problem the Pacer faced, however, was that the entire Edsel brand was a mess from the very beginning. Ford had spent years hyping up Edsel as a revolutionary new marque, but when the cars were finally released, they failed to live up to expectations. The marketing campaign was overblown and confusing, promising a car that was radically different from anything else on the market. When the Edsel Pacer finally arrived in showrooms, it turned out to be just another big American sedan, but with an unusual grille and a few unnecessary gimmicks. Consumers were not impressed, and sales suffered as a result. Compounding the problem was the unfortunate timing of Edsel's launch. The late 1950s saw an economic downturn, and buyers were becoming more cautious with their money. Rather than splurging on a flashy new brand, most people stuck with the tried and true names they already knew. Additionally, Ford's own lineup was competing with Edsel's offerings, making it even harder to justify the brand's existence. In the end, the 1958 Edsel Pacer was a casualty of one of the most infamous marketing failures in automotive history. It wasn't necessarily the worst car ever made, but it was a car that nobody really wanted. The combination of odd styling, gimmicky features, and poor brand positioning doomed it from the start. By 1960, Edsel was dead, and the Pacer, along with the rest of the lineup, was relegated to the pages of automotive history as a cautionary tale of how not to launch a new car brand. Today, the Edsel Pacer is a collector's curiosity, remembered more for its failure than for any real contribution to the industry. The 1969 Ford Nucleon remains one of the most ambitious, bizarre, and truly impractical concept cars ever envisioned. It was a product of an era when nuclear power was seen as the ultimate solution to humanity's energy needs. A time when automakers and engineers were convinced that the same technology powering submarines, aircraft carriers, and power plants could somehow be miniaturized and placed inside a passenger car. In reality, the Nucleon was a science fiction fantasy on wheels, an idea that made for a striking concept but was riddled with engineering challenges, safety hazards, and logistical impossibilities that made its realization a dream at best and a nightmare at worst. Ford's vision for the Nucleon was simple but revolutionary. Instead of a traditional gasoline or diesel engine, the car would be powered by a miniature nuclear reactor housed in the rear of the vehicle. This reactor would generate steam, which would then drive turbines to propel the car forward, much like how nuclear-powered submarines and aircraft carriers operated. Theoretically, this would allow the Nucleon to travel thousands of miles on a single fuel charge, completely eliminating the need for gasoline and reducing operating costs to almost nothing. The car would never need to stop at a gas station, and Ford imagined a future where drivers could go years without refueling, only stopping at specialized service centers to replace the depleted reactor core with a fresh one. However, while the idea was captivating, the execution was impossible. The biggest issue was radiation. A nuclear reactor, no matter how small, emits radiation that can be lethal to anyone near it. In order to keep the passengers safe, the Nucleon would have required thick shielding made from lead or other dense materials. This would have made the car extremely heavy, possibly weighing several tons more than a standard vehicle, making it impractical to drive. The forward cab design, where the passengers sat as far away from the reactor as possible, was a clear indication that Ford's engineers knew radiation was a major problem, but even this was not a real solution. The shielding needed to contain the radiation would have made the car impossible to manufacture or move efficiently. Another massive challenge was the risk of a crash. In a conventional gasoline-powered car, a collision can result in a fuel leak or a fire, but in the case of the Nucleon, an accident could mean a full-scale nuclear disaster. If the reactor housing were compromised, radioactive material could be released into the environment, turning a simple fender bender into an event on par with a small-scale nuclear meltdown. The idea of regular citizens driving around in nuclear-powered vehicles with no special training or understanding of how nuclear reactors worked was an absolute regulatory nightmare waiting to happen. Beyond the technical and safety concerns, the infrastructure for a nuclear-powered automobile simply didn't exist. While nuclear power plants were becoming more common at the time, there was no network of nuclear refueling stations where a driver could swap out an old reactor for a new one. Unlike gasoline, which could be easily transported and stored, nuclear fuel required strict regulations, specialized handling, and government oversight. The logistics of running a fleet of atomic-powered cars on public roads were simply unworkable, even in an era of boundless optimism about nuclear energy. Then there was the issue of cost. Even if Ford had somehow solved all the safety and engineering challenges, the Nucleon would have been so expensive that only the wealthiest individuals could afford it. Nuclear reactors are complex and costly to manufacture, and scaling them down to fit in a car would have required enormous amounts of research and development. The specialized maintenance and refueling infrastructure would have added even more costs, making the Nucleon an unfeasible vehicle for the mass market. From a design perspective, the Nucleon was as radical as its power source. The car had a long, aerodynamic body with a sleek, futuristic look that was heavily influenced by the space age. Its most notable feature was the dramatically forward-positioned passenger compartment, which sat almost directly over the front axle. This odd design choice wasn't for aesthetics. It was a necessity to keep passengers as far away from the reactor as possible. The car also had a bubble-like canopy, reminiscent of a jet fighter cockpit, reinforcing the idea that this was more of a concept built for visual impact rather than a serious attempt at a production car. Despite its impossibilities, the Nucleon represented the kind of daring innovation and unrestrained creativity that defined the 1950s and 1960s. It was a time when people genuinely believed that the future would be powered by atomic energy, and the Nucleon embodied that optimism. However, the realities of nuclear power, its risks. The 1962 Kaiser Darren was an ambitious but ultimately ill-fated attempt to create an American sports car that could rival European roadsters of the era. It was the brainchild of Howard "Dutch" Darren, a designer known for his bold and unconventional ideas. His vision was to produce a lightweight, stylish, and sophisticated two-seater that would blend American engineering with European-style elegance. However, while the Kaiser Darren was certainly unique, its combination of quirky features, an underpowered engine, and unfortunate timing doomed it to be little more than an automotive curiosity rather than a true success. One of the most striking aspects of the Kaiser Darren was its design. The car featured long, flowing body lines, an exaggerated curved grille that looked like a puckered mouth, and doors that didn't swing out like conventional ones, but instead slid forward into the front fenders. This was an innovative concept meant to save space and add a futuristic touch, but in reality, it was highly impractical. The sliding mechanism was prone to jamming, and if a car was involved in even a minor accident, the doors could become stuck, trapping the driver and passenger inside. While the idea might have worked better with more advanced engineering, it ended up being an example of style over substance. The car's fiberglass body was another attempt at innovation, as fiberglass was still a relatively new material for automotive manufacturing. The Chevrolet Corvette had debuted a fiberglass body just a year earlier, and Darren saw this as the future of lightweight construction. However, early fiberglass production techniques had their drawbacks, and the Kaiser Darren suffered from inconsistent panel fit, weak mounting points, and overall quality control issues. The body panels were prone to cracking, and many owners reported difficulties with alignment, especially around the unique doors. Under the hood, the Kaiser Darren was disappointing for a car that was supposed to be a sports car. It was powered by a 2.6-liter Willys F-head inline-six engine, producing just 90 horsepower. Compared to European rivals like the Jaguar XK120 or even domestic competitors like the early Chevrolet Corvette, the Kaiser Darren was significantly underpowered. Acceleration was sluggish, with a 0-60 mph time that felt more appropriate for an economy car than a performance-oriented roadster. The top speed was unimpressive, and while the car handled relatively well due to its lightweight construction, it lacked the raw performance expected from a true sports car. Another issue was the chassis. Rather than developing a dedicated sports car platform, Kaiser used a modified Henry J chassis, which was originally designed for an economy car. While this kept costs down, it also limited the car's potential. The frame was not particularly rigid, and the suspension was not tuned for high-performance driving. As a result, the Kaiser Darren had a somewhat soft and uninspiring ride, lacking the precision and excitement that buyers expected from a roadster. The Kaiser Darren also suffered from terrible timing. By the time the car reached production in 1954, Kaiser was already struggling financially. The company had limited resources and was focusing on more practical vehicles in an attempt to stay afloat. The Darren, with its niche appeal and high production costs, was not a priority. As a result, only 435 units were produced before Kaiser shut down passenger car production altogether. This made the Darren one of the rarest American sports cars ever built. Dutch Darren, determined to save his creation, personally bought up some of the remaining unsold cars and attempted to modify them for better performance. He added superchargers and other mechanical upgrades in an attempt to make the car more competitive. But by this point, the market had already moved on. The Kaiser Darren remained a commercial failure, and Dutch's efforts were ultimately in vain. Despite its lack of success when new, the Kaiser Darren has since become a fascinating collector's item. Its rarity, unique styling, and unusual sliding doors make it a standout piece in automotive history. Today, surviving examples are highly sought after, and their quirky design continues to spark interest among enthusiasts. While it never reached the heights Dutch Darren had envisioned, the car remains a symbol of ambition, creativity, and the risks that come with pushing the boundaries of automotive design. It serves as a reminder that innovation alone isn't enough to make a car successful. Practicality, engineering, and market timing are just as important. The 1985 Pontiac Fiero stands as one of the most curious and perplexing chapters in American automotive history. When it was first released in 1984, the Fiero was hailed as an ambitious attempt by General Motors to break into the world of sports cars with a small, affordable, and uniquely American offering. The concept of a mid-engine car produced by a major American manufacturer was unheard of at the time, making the Fiero an intriguing proposition to car enthusiasts and casual drivers alike. The car was designed to rival the growing popularity of Japanese sports cars, particularly those from brands like Toyota and Nissan, but it was clear from the start that the Fiero's path to success would be far from smooth. In many ways, the Fiero's design was ahead of its time. Its sleek, futuristic bodywork, with its wide, low stance and sharp lines, made it look like something from a high-end European marque. The mid-engine configuration, considered a hallmark of true sports cars, was intended to give the car superior handling and balance. Pontiac's bold move of positioning the engine behind the driver was aimed at creating a car that would offer agile cornering, improved weight distribution, and a sense of driving excitement. The small, lightweight frame seemed like the perfect foundation for a nimble sports car that could handle tight corners and offer a thrilling driving experience. However, the reality of the Fiero's performance was much less glamorous. While its mid-engine layout did indeed offer some balance and agility, it wasn't enough to make up for the car's many shortcomings. The engine, a 2.5-liter Iron Duke four-cylinder, was weak and underpowered, producing just 92 horsepower. This engine was shared with other economy cars in GM's lineup, and while it was perfectly suited for a daily commuter vehicle, it left the Fiero feeling sluggish and underwhelming for a car with such bold styling. The Fiero's acceleration was slow, and it struggled to keep pace with even the most modest of sports cars on the market. When compared to rivals such as the Toyota Celica or the Nissan 280ZX, the Fiero seemed like a pale imitation rather than a serious contender. One of the car's most infamous issues came from its safety and engineering flaws. The Fiero was prone to engine fires, a problem that plagued early models due to poor oil circulation and inadequate cooling systems. The issue was exacerbated by a lack of proper ventilation, which caused the engine to overheat and resulted in catastrophic failures. In some cases, these failures led to fires, and the car quickly earned a reputation for being dangerous to drive. The flame-prone reputation was a PR disaster for Pontiac, and it further tarnished the car's appeal among potential buyers. GM was forced to recall the Fiero, which only added to the mounting list of issues with the car. Beyond its technical shortcomings, the Fiero was criticized for its poor build quality and lack of refinement. The interior, despite offering a modern and futuristic layout, was constructed using low-quality materials. The plastics were cheap, the upholstery was stiff and uncomfortable, and the overall cabin experience was far from what would be expected from a vehicle that was supposed to evoke a sense of sport and luxury. The car's ride quality was stiff and jarring, making it uncomfortable for long trips. Additionally, the car's handling, despite the mid-engine design, was compromised by its poor suspension system, which was based on outdated components from other GM models. This made the Fiero feel more like an economy car than a true sports car when it came to road dynamics. By 1988, GM had made some significant improvements to the Fiero. The suspension was overhauled and the car's handling was vastly improved. Additionally, a 2.8-liter V6 engine was introduced, producing 140 horsepower, substantially more than the original four-cylinder. This gave the Fiero a much-needed performance boost, making it more competitive with other sports cars of the era. However, by the time these improvements were implemented, the damage had already been done. Sales of the Fiero had plummeted, and the car's reputation as a failure was firmly entrenched in the public's mind. General Motors ultimately discontinued the Fiero after the 1988 model year, leaving enthusiasts with a sense of what could have been. Despite its rocky history, the Fiero has gained a loyal following in the years since its demise, Many car enthusiasts have embraced the car's quirky nature, seeing potential in the lightweight frame and mid-engine design. Some owners have turned their Fieros into performance machines, swapping out the engines and improving the suspension to unlock the car's hidden potential. The Fiero's cult following has only grown over time, as people appreciate its uniqueness and the bold ambition that went into its creation. The Fiero remains a fascinating piece of automotive history. The 1990 Chevrolet Lumina APV, which stood for All-Purpose Vehicle, represented one of the most ambitious yet puzzling designs of its era. Launched as a minivan that was to revolutionize the segment, it immediately distinguished itself with its radically different and futuristic appearance. This minivan was designed to break away from the typical boxy shape that dominated the market and bring something more stylish and aerodynamic to the American family vehicle scene. Instead of the typical sharp edges and utilitarian shape, Chevrolet embraced a soft, rounded design with a prominent sloping front windshield and a sleek, almost spaceship-like appearance that was ahead of its time. If anything, the Lumina APV seemed like a concept car that had somehow made its way into production. From the outset, the Lumina APV was a vehicle with a bold vision. GM had decided to combine practicality with innovation, targeting families who needed a reliable, spacious car, but were also looking for something that had a more modern, youthful appeal. At first glance, it looked almost like a cross between a minivan and a futuristic shuttle, with no real predecessor to compare it to. Its aerodynamic body was supposed to give it a technological edge and improve fuel efficiency. But in reality, it was caught between two worlds. It wasn't quite the sleek, performance-driven vehicle the design implied, and it didn't fulfill the practical, no-nonsense role of a traditional minivan either. The vehicle was notable not just for its shape, but for the functionality it promised. The interior was spacious, capable of seating up to 7 people in a 3-row configuration. Chevrolet aimed to make the vehicle family-friendly by offering a substantial amount of cargo space, and the sliding side doors were a convenient feature that added to the ease of entry and exit. However, despite these practical aspects, the cabin's design and materials weren't up to the standards expected in a car of its price range. The interior quality was often criticized for feeling cheap, with hard plastics and unrefined finishes that didn't match the cutting-edge exterior. The exterior design itself sparked debates from the moment the Lumina APV hit the market. Its curvy, rounded shape, while original and unique, made it polarizing. Some admired its futuristic approach, but for others, it was simply too bizarre to take seriously. The vehicle looked as if it belonged on a science fiction set, more suited to the distant future than to suburban America in the early 1990s. Despite its undeniably bold styling, the APV failed to generate significant consumer interest. Many potential buyers didn't know how to categorize the car. Was it a minivan, a crossover, or some sort of all-purpose vehicle? The confusion about what the car was supposed to be contributed to its lackluster sales. Even though Chevrolet designed the Lumina APV to be an innovative alternative to the more boxy and practical minivans of the time, the vehicle's driving experience was disappointing. While it had the look of a car designed for cutting-edge technology, it didn't offer the performance or handling that such a radical design might suggest. The Lumina APV was powered by a range of engines, including the base 4-cylinder engine and an available V6, neither of which offered particularly impressive power. It was underwhelming on the road, with its acceleration and handling failing to inspire confidence. It was especially sluggish when fully loaded, making it hard to compete with more established competitors that offered a better balance of power, performance, and reliability. The vehicle's size and weight weren't necessarily its strengths either. Although it had a large interior, the Lumina APV's exterior dimensions were compact by minivan standards, which meant it was a bit cramped inside when it came to hauling bulky items. Its small engine options also meant it lacked the towing capability of other vehicles in the same class, and its handling wasn't up to par for the type of vehicle it aimed to be. With a minivan's reliance on practicality, a lack of towing capacity, and the inability to perform under heavy loads only added to its image as an underperformer. For all its futuristic looks, the Chevrolet Lumina APV wasn't able to blend the innovation it promised with the practicality families needed. It failed to carve out a niche and find a solid consumer base. While minivans were still a relatively new concept in the United States, the market was looking for vehicles that were both practical and easy to live with on a day-to-day basis. The Lumina APV, with its unusual styling and lackluster performance, was seen as too strange and not practical enough for most buyers. It was ahead of its time in many ways, but it didn't have the right elements to make it work in the early 90s. While the Lumina APV is often remembered as a quirky and somewhat ill-fated attempt at innovation, the 1989 Geo Metro is often remembered as one of the most extreme representations of economy-focused vehicles in America, but it also stands as a cautionary tale of what happens when a car sacrifices too much in the name of cost-cutting and efficiency. A product of the collaboration between General Motors and Suzuki, the Metro was part of a broader trend in the late 1980s where automakers sought to compete in the compact car market with cars that were affordable, fuel-efficient, and cheap to manufacture. While it certainly succeeded on the fuel efficiency front, the Geo Metro's shortcomings in virtually every other area of the car ownership experience painted a much less flattering picture of what economy could mean when taken too literally. The Geo Metro's design and construction were unapologetically minimalistic, aimed at offering the lowest possible price point for buyers who needed basic transportation. Built on a small, lightweight platform, the Metro's most notable feature was its diminutive size. With a 1.0-liter, three-cylinder engine producing a meager 55 horsepower, the car was woefully underpowered, leaving it struggling to keep up with highway traffic or handle even modest inclines with any sort of confidence. Despite its small engine, it was also remarkably slow, with acceleration that felt like a game of patience, especially when fully loaded with passengers or luggage. The construction of the Metro reflected its no-frills approach. The body was made of thin, lightweight materials, which kept the car's weight down, but also contributed to its flimsy feeling on the road. The ride was harsh, with minimal sound insulation and suspension that felt more like a rough go-kart than a practical daily driver. Inside, the Metro was as basic as it gets, with the barest of interiors, plastic trim, simple seats, and a lack of features that made even the most mundane tasks like adjusting the mirrors or rolling down the windows feel like manual labor. Air conditioning was an optional extra, and there were no fancy infotainment systems, power windows, or power locks, which might have been considered luxuries for a car of this price and category. Despite these numerous drawbacks, the Geo Metro was undeniably efficient. With its small engine, lightweight construction, and basic design, it could achieve impressive fuel economy numbers, up to 50 miles per gallon on the highway, making it one of the most fuel-efficient cars on the market at the time. For buyers who were focused purely on keeping their costs as low as possible, the Geo Metro served as an affordable choice that offered an inexpensive way to get from point A to point B. The car's low purchase price, combined with its minimal fuel consumption, made it an ideal option for those who had no interest in performance, luxury, or anything beyond basic functionality. However, the downside to this approach was that the Geo Metro was an uncomfortable car to own and drive. The lack of soundproofing and the small engine meant that every ride felt like a battle with wind noise and engine strain. On long trips, the lack of comfort and the constant high-pitched hum of the three-cylinder engine could become grating, and the car's lack of space made it feel cramped, even for the two passengers it was designed to hold. The handling was also subpar, as the car's light construction made it prone to feeling unstable, particularly when cornering at higher speeds. The suspension was rudimentary at best, and potholes or rough roads could quickly make the car feel rattly and uncomfortable. One of the more unfortunate aspects of the Geo Metro was its lack of safety features. In an era when safety was becoming an increasing concern for car buyers, the Metro's basic design left little room for protection. With minimal airbags, no ABS, and limited crash protection, the Metro lacked the modern safety features that were starting to appear in even some budget cars at the time. This lack of safety contributed to its reputation as a cheap, disposable vehicle, something that was designed to meet a specific need but wasn't built to last or protect its occupants in the event of an accident. Over time, the Geo Metro's reputation shifted from being seen as an inexpensive, efficient car to being viewed as a symbol of everything that could go wrong when a vehicle was stripped down to the bare minimum. Though the Metro was popular in certain circles, especially among budget-conscious buyers, young drivers, and those in need of an inexpensive commuter car, it never achieved the same kind of respect or admiration that other small, efficient cars managed to garner. As a result, while the Metro was a success on paper in terms of sales and fuel efficiency, it failed to become a beloved classic or even a standout in the compact car market. In the years since its production ended, the Geo Metro has become somewhat of an automotive curiosity. The 1988 Dodge Rampage was one of the more unusual vehicles to hit the American market, blending elements of a minivan with a pickup truck, creating a design that was puzzling at best. It was part of Chrysler's experiment to create a compact, car-based utility vehicle that could serve the needs of both urban drivers and light-duty truck owners. The concept behind the Rampage was to offer the versatility of a pickup truck, but with the fuel efficiency, maneuverability, and ride quality of a compact car. Unfortunately, the execution left much to be desired, and the Rampage never truly found its place in the automotive landscape. At its core, the Rampage was based on the Dodge Omni, a front-wheel drive compact car. This car-based platform gave the Rampage a unique, car-like handling and ride quality, but it was also a major limitation when it came to load capacity, durability, and utility. The Rampage was powered by a small 1.7-liter four-cylinder engine that produced just 84 horsepower, making it underpowered for a vehicle that was supposed to function as a utility vehicle. While the small engine meant it was reasonably efficient in terms of fuel economy, it also meant that the Rampage struggled to handle anything close to heavy lifting, further limiting its potential as a work vehicle. The most striking feature of the Rampage was its design, which attempted to combine the best or worst qualities of both a car and a truck. The front half was essentially a compact sedan with a car-like dashboard, seating arrangement, and handling characteristics. The rear half featured a short, shallow pickup bed that was more suited for light cargo or small tasks. While this gave the Rampage a unique look, it didn't quite deliver the functionality that truck buyers were looking for. The bed was simply too small to haul anything substantial, and the car-like suspension system made the Rampage ill-suited to handle any serious payloads. Its unconventional design left many scratching their heads. The Rampage was too small and too low-slung to be a traditional truck, yet it was also too cramped and impractical to function as a true car. Potential buyers in search of a small truck for light-duty use were often left wondering why they wouldn't just buy a full-fledged compact pickup, which would offer more versatility and better performance. Those who were looking for a compact car or hatchback for urban use were equally puzzled by the Rampage's pickup bed, which seemed out of place on a vehicle that was otherwise designed to be a car. On top of the design quirks, the Rampage's performance was nothing to write home about. The 1.7-liter engine was sluggish, particularly with the extra weight of the truck bed. Acceleration was slow, and highway passing power was limited, making the Rampage feel underwhelming when compared to both traditional cars and other small trucks of the era. Its handling was decent for a small car, but the lack of power and truck-like suspension made it feel a bit disconnected from the road, especially when carrying any weight in the bed. As far as features went, the Rampage was basic, as was typical for vehicles of this class during the 1980s. The interior was sparse and utilitarian, with plastic upholstery and basic controls. It offered minimal luxury, but that was likely to be expected in a vehicle designed for practicality. Despite being an oddity, the Rampage was relatively affordable, which made it an intriguing option for buyers who didn't need the full capabilities of a traditional truck, but still wanted the option to haul small loads on occasion. Ultimately, the 1988 Dodge Rampage failed to make much of an impact on the market. Its strange design and lackluster performance didn't appeal to traditional truck buyers, who preferred more robust, larger vehicles with better towing and payload capacities. It also didn't win over car buyers, who didn't see the need for a pickup bed when they could simply purchase a small hatchback or station wagon with far more interior space. Despite its quirks and unique position in the automotive world, The Rampage simply couldn't find a place in a marketplace already dominated by more capable vehicles. Production of the Rampage lasted only a few years, and it was eventually discontinued in 1990. Today, the 1988 Dodge Rampage remains a rare sight, often remembered more for its oddball nature than its practicality or success. It stands as a reminder of the 1980s experimentation with niche vehicles, where car manufacturers tried to push the boundaries of what cars could be and how they could meet the diverse needs of a changing consumer market. Although the Rampage wasn't a commercial success, it still occupies a certain niche in automotive history as one of the strangest and most bewildering vehicles of its era. The 1979 AMC Matador was a car that seemed to exist in a confused space, both in terms of design and purpose. It came at a time when AMC, American Motors Corporation, was struggling to establish its identity in the ever-competitive automotive market. While some cars in AMC's lineup had found a place in the hearts of buyers, the Matador didn't manage to leave a lasting impression. Instead, it became an oddity in the brand's history, a perplexing footnote that was hard to categorize, and harder still to understand its appeal. The Matador, originally launched in the early 1970s, was intended to be a mid-sized sedan that could compete with popular models from Ford, Chevrolet, and Chrysler. However, by the time the 1979 version hit the market, the car's design had already started to feel outdated. The awkward proportions of the Matador were one of its most immediately noticeable features. Its long, flat hood, bulky rear, and boxy styling made it look less refined compared to its competitors, and the overall design just didn't seem to click with the evolving tastes of the car-buying public. It looked more like a car stuck in the previous decade rather than something that was trying to look forward. One of the issues with the Matador was that it couldn't quite figure out what it wanted to be. It wasn't small enough to be considered a compact car, and it wasn't large enough to compete with full-size sedans, creating a strange middle ground that didn't quite meet the needs of buyers. The sedan's proportions made it feel awkward on the road, neither particularly agile nor particularly comfortable. This lack of focus meant that the Matador didn't appeal strongly to any particular market segment, which hindered its success. While the design was questionable, it wasn't the Matador's only shortcoming. It also struggled with performance and reliability. AMC had equipped the car with a range of engine options, but none were particularly powerful or impressive. The base engine was a modest 4.2-liter six-cylinder, and even with larger V8 options, the Matador failed to provide the performance that buyers expected from a car of its size. Fuel efficiency was mediocre, which, coupled with its bulky design, made it less appealing at a time when consumers were becoming more concerned with gas mileage, particularly after the energy crises of the 1970s. On the road, the Matador was considered a bit sluggish, and its handling was not up to par with other mid-size sedans. The suspension, though designed for comfort, didn't offer the level of responsiveness that some of its competitors provided, and the overall driving experience was far from exciting. It was a car that lacked personality, and when compared to other vehicles in its class, it didn't hold up as well in terms of driving dynamics, style, or innovation. Despite these shortcomings, the 1979 AMC Matador did have some qualities that were somewhat ahead of its time. For instance, it was available with a few luxury features, such as power windows, air conditioning, and plush seating, making it more comfortable than some of its more utilitarian competitors. Still, these features weren't enough to offset the car's other flaws, and it never truly garnered much attention in the marketplace. The Matador's legacy, or lack thereof, also played a role in its eventual demise. AMC was not able to successfully market the Matador, and it eventually fell victim to the company's declining fortunes. The brand tried to reposition the car a few times, even offering special editions in an attempt to draw in buyers. But by the time the 1979 model rolled around, the car's time had passed. The Matador became a symbol of AMC's troubles in the late 1970s, a car that couldn't find its place in a rapidly changing automotive market. After AMC's exit from the mid-size sedan market in the early 1980s, the Matador faded into obscurity. While it's still remembered by some for its distinctive look and its place in automotive history, it never earned a place in the hearts of many car enthusiasts or collectors. Today, the 1979 AMC Matador remains an odd, somewhat laughable relic from a time when American manufacturers were struggling to compete with the growing influence of imports in the changing tastes of consumers. Looking back, the Matador is a reminder of an era when automakers were scrambling to keep up with the evolving market and the shifting demands of buyers. It was a car that never quite managed to hit the mark, resulting in a lackluster legacy that's largely forgotten today. If anything, the 1979 AMC Matador stands as an example of the automotive industry's growing pains during the 1970s, caught between outdated design choices and the desire to meet the demands of a changing market. The 1992 Ford Probe was introduced with the intention of competing with popular import sports coupes like the Honda Prelude and Toyota Celica. Ford, seeking to capture a younger audience looking for a sporty, affordable option, rolled out the Probe as a more modern alternative to its traditional lineup. However, the result was a car that, while aiming to be sleek and stylish, ended up being an awkward blend of design missteps and underwhelming performance. From the outset, the Probe's styling was one of its most controversial aspects. Though it was designed to have a sporty and aerodynamic look, its rounded, bulbous curves didn't quite hit the mark in the way Ford had hoped. The front end, in particular, was often criticized for its odd, overly extended headlights and a grille that just didn't quite seem to belong on a car trying to position itself as a performance machine. While some elements of the design were striking, the overall aesthetic left many potential buyers confused about what the car was trying to be. Was it a sleek, aggressive sports coupe, or just a more stylish commuter car? The Probe seemed to fall somewhere in between, lacking the sharp, aggressive lines of its competition, but also not quite reaching the refined sophistication of higher-end models. Beyond its exterior design, the Probe's performance also left much to be desired. While it had the necessary sports coupe elements, a relatively lightweight, a front-wheel drive layout, and a decent suspension system, the car was ultimately too tame to satisfy those seeking the thrills typically associated with performance cars. The base model was powered by a 1.8-liter, 8-valve engine that produced only 88 horsepower. Although it was decent for everyday driving, it was nowhere near the level of performance that the sporty coupe segment demanded. The more powerful GT version, which came equipped with a 2.2-liter turbocharged engine, was certainly an improvement, offering around 145 horsepower. Still, even this engine struggled to provide the kind of driving excitement that enthusiasts expected from a car with such a design. The Probe's handling was also a bit of a letdown. While it wasn't particularly bad by any means, it didn't offer the precise, sharp cornering or the thrill that rivals like the Honda Prelude or the Toyota Celica were known for. Its front-wheel drive layout, which was common for the time, also meant that it struggled with understeering and lacked the balance that some rear-wheel drive sports coupes delivered. The result was a car that simply didn't feel as engaging to drive as it should have, leaving enthusiasts yearning for more from Ford's entry into the sporty coupe market. In terms of interior quality, the Probe didn't offer much to write home about. While it was functional, it lacked the refinement and sporty edge that competitors like the Honda Prelude and Mazda MX-6 brought to the table. The cabin was relatively simple, with materials that were fine but nothing special. The design also felt a bit sterile, as though Ford had focused more on the exterior design and less on creating a compelling, driver-focused interior experience. It was a car that looked the part from the outside, but didn't quite capture the essence of the driving experience on the inside. The Ford Probe did come with some advanced features for its time, including a relatively refined audio system and an optional sunroof, but it was still missing the sporty feel that a car in its class needed to appeal to its target demographic. It seemed to lack the emotional connection that other cars in the segment offered, leaving buyers feeling somewhat indifferent. The 1992 Ford Probe ultimately ended up being a car that neither truly excelled in performance nor in design. While it wasn't a total failure, it didn't make the impact Ford hoped for in the sports coupe market. It ended up as a car caught in an identity crisis, trying to please too many different audiences without fully committing to any one direction. As a result, it became something of an enigma, a car that, while functional and not without merit, failed to live up to the expectations set by its competition. Today, the 1992 Ford Probe is often seen as a quirky and forgotten part of Ford's history. It didn't manage to capture a cult following like some other cars from the era, and it's now viewed largely as an oddball, an experiment that didn't quite succeed. Despite this, the Probe still holds some value for collectors looking for affordable, unassuming cars from the 90s. It may not have become the icon that Ford had hoped, but it remains a unique example of a manufacturer trying to break into a new market with a vehicle that, for better or worse, will always stand out in the history of American cars. The 1991 Ford Indigo concept was a bold and striking departure from traditional automotive design. Ford's design team envisioned it as a radical leap into the future, and it showcased some of the most forward-thinking ideas of its time. With its futuristic lines and space-age aesthetics, the Indigo concept looked more like something out of a science fiction movie than a practical road car. The vehicle's design was so unconventional that it stood out not just as a concept, but as a statement of what was possible with automotive innovation, pushing the limits of creativity and imagination. The Indigo's most notable feature was its dramatically curved and sculpted body, with sweeping lines that seemed to defy traditional automotive logic. The car's exterior was so radically designed that it almost appeared as if it was designed for a world far beyond the 1990s. Its aerodynamic contours, which looked almost like they were inspired by the wings of an aircraft, were complemented by a low-slung stance and a smooth, seamless surface. The absence of sharp angles made it look like a futuristic pod, as though it were ready to fly rather than roll on conventional tires. With a glass canopy that stretched across the top of the car, giving it an almost bubble-like look, the Indigo was futuristic in ways that few vehicles before it had been. The car was also designed to embody the notion of high performance and efficiency, with cutting-edge materials used in its construction. The body was made from advanced composites, and Ford had envisioned it as a car that would push the boundaries of what was possible in terms of aerodynamics and weight reduction. At the time, it was hard to imagine such a car on the road, and it felt more like a glimpse into a world where cars might be lighter, faster, and more efficient. The interior of the Ford Indigo was just as radical as its exterior. Instead of the conventional dashboard and steering wheel, the interior featured a minimalist design that was far ahead of its time. The cabin was constructed with ergonomics in mind, aiming to create an open, accessible space with a dashboard that seemed to melt into the car's sleek lines. The instrument cluster was digital, featuring a futuristic display that was a far cry from the mechanical dials and analog gauges that were common in cars at the time. It was clear that Ford had a vision for the future of automobiles, one where technology and design were inextricably linked to create a truly unique driving experience. Under the hood, the Ford Indigo concept featured a mid-engine layout, something that was relatively rare for mainstream vehicles at the time. This configuration would have theoretically allowed for better handling and a more balanced driving experience, although the concept was more about pushing boundaries than about delivering a production-ready, practical vehicle. The engine itself, which was a high-performance unit, was designed to provide the car with both speed and efficiency, though it remained more of a concept than a functional production powertrain. Despite its impressive design and forward-thinking features, the Ford Indigo never made it to production. It was ultimately too radical for its time. The concept car, while a stunning showcase of Ford's design and engineering capabilities, was simply too far ahead of its time to be viable as a real-world car. Many of the ideas presented in the Indigo, such as the use of advanced composites, futuristic aerodynamics, and digital instrumentation, would eventually make their way into production vehicles. But it would take decades for the automotive industry to catch up to the Indigo's vision. The 1991 Ford Indigo concept stands as one of those rare cars that was less about practicality and more about exploration. It was a car that never had the chance to change the industry, but offered a glimpse of the possibilities of the future. Today, the Ford Indigo is remembered as one of the most visually striking concept cars of the 1990s, a design experiment that helped to push the boundaries of automotive design and technology. It didn't influence the mass-market cars of its time, but its legacy lives on as a reminder that the future of the automobile is always just a few ideas away. The 2004 Chrysler Crossfire was a curious blend of European design and American engineering, but it never truly managed to hit the mark with consumers. Created in collaboration with Mercedes-Benz, the Crossfire was built on the chassis of the Mercedes-Benz SLK, which meant that it had a strong foundation, but its design choices and execution left much to be desired. At first glance, the Crossfire appeared striking, with its curvy, wedge-shaped body and aggressive lines. However, the car's appearance wasn't enough to overcome its shortcomings when it came to practicality and overall driving experience. The Crossfire's exterior design was a blend of sleek, futuristic lines and aggressive, almost sharp angles, which made it stand out on the road. Its wide, low stance and unique rear end, which featured a prominent rear spoiler and narrow, angular taillights, gave the car a distinctively sporty presence. However, the design was often seen as a bit too out there for many consumers, lacking the timeless appeal of some of its competitors. Its curvaceous lines and sharp edges, while visually interesting, did not always translate into the kind of streamlined elegance that many sports car enthusiasts would expect. The shape, while bold, seemed to be a bit too focused on creating an aesthetic rather than optimizing performance and practicality. Under the hood, the Chrysler Crossfire featured a 3.2-liter V6 engine, which was borrowed from Mercedes-Benz. This engine provided a decent level of power, delivering 215 horsepower, and was paired with either a 6-speed manual or a 5-speed automatic transmission. While the engine wasn't underpowered, it didn't quite match the expectations of a sports car, especially when compared to more established models in its class. Its performance felt somewhat tame, and despite its styling, the car lacked the raw excitement many buyers were hoping for. The ride was firm, but it didn't provide the kind of exhilarating handling that one would expect from a European-inspired coupe. In terms of interior, the Crossfire was a bit of a mixed bag. The cabin was comfortable but felt cramped, especially for taller individuals. The design, while visually appealing with its minimalist approach and high-quality materials, wasn't quite as luxurious or refined as one would expect from a European car based on the Mercedes-Benz platform. While the seats were supportive, the interior felt more utilitarian than the plush interiors typically found in luxury sports cars. The controls were straightforward, but there were some awkward ergonomic choices that made the driving experience less enjoyable. Additionally, the rear trunk space was limited, and the car's small windows didn't provide the best visibility, making it feel less practical for everyday use. One of the more perplexing elements of the Chrysler Crossfire was its lack of true market identity. It was positioned as a sporty, stylish coupe, but its performance and handling didn't fully support that image. It wasn't a true sports car, nor was it a practical everyday vehicle. As a result, it found a niche audience, but its appeal was limited. The car's European-inspired design, while bold, didn't mesh as seamlessly with American sensibilities, and this left many potential buyers unsure of what to make of it. Despite the high hopes that Chrysler had for the Crossfire, the car struggled to find a lasting place in the market. It didn't sell in large numbers, and after just a few years of production, Chrysler discontinued it in 2008. The Crossfire has since become a bit of an oddity in the automotive world, a car that tried to blend different styles and performance ideals but never quite hit the sweet spot. While it remains a unique piece of automotive design, the Chrysler Crossfire is often remembered as one of those cars that could have been great, but ultimately fell short of expectations. The 2003 Hummer H2 was a striking example of American excess, a massive, imposing vehicle that embodied the very definition of bravado in the automotive world. Designed to be the civilian counterpart to the military-inspired Hummer H1, the H2 aimed to bring the rugged, all-terrain capabilities of its predecessor to a broader consumer market. However, while it succeeded in making a bold statement, the H2's combination of silent, gas-guzzling engine and over-the-top design made it a symbol of extravagance and excess rather than practicality. At nearly 6.5 feet tall and weighing over 6,000 pounds, the H2's sheer size was hard to ignore. It was a vehicle that demanded attention with its wide stance, towering height, and massive grille. The front end was dominated by the Hummer's iconic bold, angular lines, and the overall design had a militaristic, in-your-face look that made it stand out among the sea of more conventional SUVs on the market. The H2 was built to impress, and it did just that. Its rugged, almost intimidating presence made it clear that this was a vehicle meant for people who wanted to stand out, show off, and embrace the idea of driving something that was impossible to ignore. Under the hood, the H2 was powered by a 6.0-liter V8 engine, capable of producing 325 horsepower. While this was a decent amount of power, it was hardly impressive for a vehicle of the H2's size. The engine's thirst for fuel, however, was the real story. The H2's fuel efficiency, or rather its lack thereof, became one of the most significant criticisms of the vehicle. It could barely manage 10 miles per gallon in the city and struggled to reach 15 miles per gallon on the highway. In an era when fuel prices were steadily rising and environmental concerns were becoming more prominent, the H2's insatiable appetite for fuel made it seem even more out of touch with the times. Despite its enormous size, the H2 was equipped with off-road capabilities that were impressive by any standard. The vehicle was built on a truck chassis, which gave it a rugged durability and an elevated suspension that allowed it to tackle rough terrain with ease. It had the ability to climb steep inclines, navigate rocky paths, and traverse deep water with relative ease, making it an impressive machine for off-road enthusiasts. However, for the majority of H2 owners who never took their vehicle off the beaten path, the off-road prowess seemed like an afterthought, especially given that it was rarely, if ever, tested in such conditions. Inside, the H2's cabin was as large and imposing as its exterior. The interior featured leather upholstery, a robust sound system, and a wealth of high-end materials that added a sense of luxury to the vehicle. However, despite the luxurious touches, the H2's interior design was often criticized for being awkward and overly utilitarian. The cabin felt cavernous but was also somewhat unrefined, with a lot of hard plastics and a layout that didn't always mesh well with the vehicle's imposing exterior. The driving experience was also less than refined. Steering was heavy, the ride was bumpy, and parking the massive SUV in tight spaces was a challenge for even the most experienced drivers. The H2 was, in many ways, a symbol of the early 2000s, a time when conspicuous consumption and larger-than-life vehicles were in vogue. It became an icon of the more is more mindset that dominated certain segments of American society at the time. Celebrities, business moguls, and those wanting to make a statement flocked to the H2, making it one of the most talked about vehicles of its era. However, the H2 was also widely criticized for its environmental impact, poor fuel economy, and overindulgence in a world increasingly concerned with sustainability and practicality. Despite its polarizing nature, the Hummer H2 found a sizable following during its production run, and it remained a status symbol for many until it was discontinued in 2009. Its legacy, however, remains one of excess and extravagance, a reminder of a time when bigger was better and gas-guzzling machines were admired rather than scrutinized. The H2 will likely be remembered as both an iconic and controversial vehicle, an example of American automotive bravado taken to its extreme, for better or for worse.